Freya, welcome to the Content 10x podcast. It's great to have you on.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me, Amy.
It's so nice to have you here, and I know we're going to have a fantastic conversation. We've just been wrapping up on the podcast a series all about B2B content strategy. So it's been this 7-part series covering everything from defining a content strategy and competitor audience analysis, messaging, positioning, platforms and formats, repurposing, and through the whole thing, a big aspect of what I've been talking about has been that alignment with sales as well. So from the definition of the content strategy to messaging to everything is the feedback loops and the back and forward between marketing and sales. And so I'm really looking forward to the conversation with you today because I know you've got lots of views and opinions. But before we get in, Freya, just a little bit of an intro, which is going to be useful to set the scene for this conversation too, in terms of your career and how you got to where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast and kind of rounding off what has, I'm sure, been a really interesting series. Talking about one of my favorite topics, which is that sales and marketing alignment piece that I know we've talked about a lot in different situations as well, Amy. So I'm Freya Ward. I'm an associate managing director at a company called Headley Media. We are a B2B technology lead generation company. So we work with B2B tech companies, anything from startup all the way through to enterprise businesses in that tech space. My career started many moons ago on the marketing side of things. I did a marketing apprenticeship to begin with, and then worked agency side. So I worked at a media and advertising agency. And then I jumped over to the dark side almost 8 years ago to supplier side and joined the Headley Media team, focusing on kind of international clients and supporting them. But I have always either been or worked with B2B marketers. So in my position now, I'm fortunate that I have that visibility into how sales and marketing are working together or not working together so well inside of tech companies, anything, like I say, from startup through to enterprise. And one of my responsibilities at Headley is working with those clients to establish stronger relationships between the two departments, to ultimately result in a more positive and successful outcome from the campaigns that we work with those companies on.
Excellent. Quite a journey that you've been on then, and you've got such a good rounded experience. There's a saying that often goes round. This is what I've been told many times. Okay, the role of marketing is to break sales, and then the role of sales is to break ops. You've been in agency, publisher side, marketing, sales. What do you see the truth there? Like, do you see the truth in that marketing break sales, sales break ops? That's how it works.
I think it can. I think it can happen for sure. Yeah, I think if marketing have the objective to break sales, then the simplest way of doing that is to overwhelm them with data and leads and, completely overwhelm them and over deliver. And then sales to break ops, it's then pushing that problem onto the ops side of things, right? And I think that can happen, but I don't think that should be what we strive for. I think often there is a fractious relationship between sales and marketing for one reason or another. I've been on both sides of the fence. At one point in my career, I could not stand sales, and at one point in my career, I've worked on the sales side. I couldn't stand marketing, right? So it is a fractious relationship. You are all striving for the same end result now, I think, in the majority of cases, which is revenue or contribution to revenue. Um, and there are so many different things that can be done to build alignment between the two departments. And I have worked with clients that have some of the worst internal relationships between the two departments. They're in competition with one another, and they have managed to turn it around just with small changes every single day. But in my experience, it has to come from the top all the way down to the individual contributor to make that change inside of a business. And then when we bring ops into it as well, again, everyone has to be singing from the same hymn sheet, because it's a lot easier for there to be frustration between the departments than it actually is. It's a lot simpler to be angry with the other department and blame the other department than it is to have harmony and work together. But when everyone sings from the same hymn sheet, things start really changing and you start moving towards a shared motion.
And we'll look into how we can enable that. So what happens there? So When it comes to content specifically, then content can enable sales, and marketing create lots and lots and lots of different content. Some of that is going to be serving brand and long-term demand, and some of it is supposed to directly support sales. So when you look at the content that is meant to be there to enable sales, what types of content do you see as helping to move the needle? And also on the other side, the types of content that often just gets unused, and we may think we're enabling sales, but that doesn't get used.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think this is different depending on whether you are selling a service, a product, a solution, and the size and scale of opportunity that you are selling as well. I think where marketing content really does enable sales is when there is a communication between the two departments. So when a marketing professional that is responsible for content development is almost interviewing the salesperson and understanding exactly where the gaps are, not necessarily by directly asking them where are the gaps and what content do you want, because they're not content experts. They might not identify those gaps themselves. But if you as a marketer are able to shadow client and prospecting conversations or get that direct feedback from the salesperson, then you as a marketeer are able to identify where those gaps are and where there may be content that can aid and support. In my experience, content like product sheets and things like that, they're great to have as a salesperson, but they don't close the deal for you. Things like case studies, I think, are so, so valuable. And if case studies are done well and effectively, if it is a verbal, video, a visual or verbal case study, that is a fantastic piece of marketing created content that actually enables sales. And it's not something that a salesperson would necessarily be able to create themselves. I think educational pieces of content as well can work really, really well, but you have to have the buy in from sales on how to use that, when the right time to use that content is, and the right way of using that content. Because if a salesperson just sends over, here's a brochure and here's another piece of content, no context, no reason as to why I've picked out this piece of content other than my marketing person said I should send it over and it should help, that doesn't really do justice, does it? But if there's context around it, and it's, when we spoke on the phone last week, Amy, you told me that your biggest concern right now when choosing a new supplier for X, Y, and Z is this, and this. Here's a case study of a company in a similar space that decided to work with us, and this is how we move the needle for them. Or if you haven't got case studies, then here's a checklist that we provide prospects at this stage or clients at this stage when they're evaluating different suppliers like us. It should hopefully help while you're conducting this research. Those kind of pieces of content that positions your business and your sales team as a thought leader and a supportive resource while the B2B buyer is conducting research or going through those stages. Those are the bits of content that marketing can create that will really help sales.
Who do you see as ultimately owning that brief for sales enablement then? The sales team owning the brief to come to marketing and say, these are the missing case studies or these are the missing checklists. Do you see it coming from sales rather than marketing coming to sales and saying, we've been thinking about creating this checklist and these case studies? Or what would the perfect feedback loop look like, I guess, to come to that agreement?
I think the perfect one is a bit of both. So it's a regular cadence where you have that conversation and you know that you can pull on each resource. I think in the absence of that communication, it should come from marketing, but it should be a case of sales. I would like to look at your recent recordings. The reason I want to do that is because I want to help you with content creation. I want to create content that will fill in some of the gaps. I am responsible as marketing to identify those gaps. If you have an input, if there is something that you think you keep coming against an FAQ or you keep coming against the same challenge or pain point, then tell me. And if there's something I can create, then I absolutely will. But if we put the emphasis if we put the emphasis on sales to ask marketing for it, then marketing it feeds even more so into this hierarchy piece, I think, between sales and marketing, and it doesn't allow for the creativity. And that is really truly why marketing should be creating and leading on the content side of it, because they can think outside of the actual individual situation. Because if sales just ask marketing to create content for every pitch and call and everything else, they're not identifying themes and trends. They're we're falling into ABX territory there.
Aside from content, but just the data that sales is getting. So the data that moves back and forward to help inform marketing at the front, like more at the front end of the funnel. So not so much the sales enablement, but the content marketing's creating to bring leads and prospects into the business to pass through to sales. We need that feedback loop as well, don't we? Because that's how we're building the brand and the messaging that ultimately leads to those people coming to the business. So, what would you say is the main sales signal to go back to marketing? So, we often talk about reason for rejection, like the marketing team being acutely aware and working with sales because we can accumulate data on the reason that sales are not going through and the thing that is causing people to stop, then we can start to address that. Do you see that as being key? And is it being captured? Do you see it being captured, or is it something that's kind of falling through the cracks within that feedback loop as well?
From the signal for marketing to pass over to sales, or the signal from sales to pass back to marketing?
Sales to pass back to marketing from the view that when things are falling down on the sales side, so we need to look a little bit more at who's coming through in the messaging that is coming to sales in the first place. What do you think are those main data points and signals, like the key things that we really, really do want sales to be gathering to go to marketing to try and address where things are falling through on that side?
I think where I see the most common cause of what I'd call lead leakage, which is this leakage of data that kind of just falls out the funnel and ends up in no man's land. One of the key causes of that is either unidentified, so it's salespeople don't believe that that contact is ready to talk to them, or they're unable to make connection with them through multiple channels, or they're getting kind of pushed back to marketing, but without that justification and that reason. So the first thing I would recommend to a business and for marketing to take control of, because often this happens in my experience because sales are working in one CRM, marketing are working in another CRM or marketing automation systems, whatever you want to call them. Take Salesforce and HubSpot by way of example. And the communication between the two platforms is great because, leads hit a certain score, they trip over to sales, sales get notified. Sales reject the lead, and then sometimes they just sit in this in between space, and they maybe go back into the CRM system, the HubSpot system, and maybe go on a workflow or a nurture, but no one is really taking ownership of that drop off. And we look at the statistics. I think it's something like it's the 95-5 rule. So only 5% of your total addressable market is actually in market to buy at one given time. So that's tiny in comparison. 95% of the audience that you are engaging are not ready to buy. And therefore, that is the strongest signal that they're not ready to talk to sales. There's so much as well in the market at the moment about the B2B buying journey changing and the introduction of AI and AI search and Gen AI enablement is meaning that research is being conducted for much longer and in a much more sophisticated way than ever before. So, with all of these different changes, I believe the biggest and ripest opportunity for marketing is to actually start tracking that in between. So that lead leakage, and then looking for those signals that you were talking of, Amy. Often, sales aren't held accountable to a mandatory field within the CRM, which is if you are pushing this lead back to marketing, which of these 10 different reasons does it most resonate with the reason that you're pushing this lead back? So that could be ghosting. We call it ghosting at Headley. It's basically they're never not talking to us. They won't respond. If they have responded, maybe it's budget. If they have responded, maybe they've gone with a competitor. If they have responded, maybe there's been changes inside of their business, the C-suite changes or whatever it might be, things that are out of the salesperson's control. If they have responded, maybe it's a timing issue, not right now, those kind of things. If you can get those signals tracked within the CRM when sales are pushing the leads back, then that 95% that are not in market to buy right now and aren't quite ready to speak to sales becomes chunks of data that you can then work with. The ripest opportunity for me as a marketer then at that point is the ones that are not right now. Because the not right nows aren't saying never. they're saying not right now. So therefore you can put them on a workflow. Maybe that workflow is a 12-step content journey with 5 different channels. I don't know. Rescore them, re-nurture them, and those are the ones that in 3 months' time may be ready to speak to sales. Ghosters are slightly different, but maybe you can re-engage those with a nurture workflow. You can make an assumption that with ghosters, it could be a portion of them are not right now. It could be a portion, if the demographics are right, the ICP is right and accurate for your usual purchase or buyers, then maybe it is a not right now. With the ones that went with competitors, you can put them into a workflow that is much more of a competitor displacement workflow. It could be checking in with them in 6 weeks' time. How's it going with said competitor? There's so much more you can do with that 95% if you know something about them. And if you make it mandatory for sales and you make it easy for sales, it's only going to take a couple of those leads to be recycled and come back round again to that salesperson when it is ripe and ready with more intelligence. Only need a few of those for then the wider sales team to be like, hold on a minute, marketing might be onto something here, because the sales team are targeted based on revenue or appointments or whatever it might be. And the B2B buyer is changing, which is actually making life harder for the salesperson as well. So if you can do anything to help them have more qualified, riper, more engaged leads, even if it doesn't mean 500 of them on their desk today, and actually we're going to do it in bite-sized pieces and you'll get 50 right now, and then in 6 weeks' time you might get some reconversions and whatever it might be, then marketing starts getting a seat at the table.
Which do you, in your experience, see to be the most recoverable leakage aspect that, with a good assignment back and addressing well, can bring in that recovery?
Not right now. The ones that are not right now, because if you can get that feedback from the leads that there's nothing necessarily wrong with your product, it's not that it's not that they've had personnel changes and the budget's been cut, and they do wanna have a conversation with you, but, "Whoa, not right now." That for me is the most recoverable, because the ICP fits, they're in the market, but maybe they're just researching. They're just not ready for a sales conversation. So if you can meet them where they are, where they're at, and nurture them through your marketing automation and through workflows, follow them across socials, all the channels, all the passive marketing that we can do, the dark metrics, then when they are ready to convert, they've built that brand loyalty.
And you know how you were saying that sometimes you see that the issue is that it's two different CRMs, so it's a bit of a system thing too, where marketing is using one, sales is using another. In your experience, is it preferable for the organization to try and find a CRM that suits both in a more seamless flow so that you don't have that issue where it could just be that leakage is falling through of a mixed CRM workflow?
Is such a good question. In my experience, I've actually never worked at a business that is unified by one CRM across both departments. I've never actually experienced that. There are so many things that you can do to make the CRMs talk to one another, but in my experience, for example, Salesforce doesn't really lend itself to being great for email.
Yeah.
There are there are integrations you can make with Outlook, for example, that will track your emails in Salesforce and stuff. But if you're doing sends and promos and everything else, Salesforce is not the one. I wouldn't even necessarily encourage salespeople to use the email function within Salesforce because it's very clunky and yeah. HubSpot is fantastic for segmentation, for workflows, for everything else. But and they obviously have a sales part within HubSpot, like a skin for sales. In my experience of kind of playing around with it, it's not the most intuitive for what you need as a salesperson. So
Yeah.
I don't know that there is. Maybe if you're in a smaller business or more of kind of a startup, then maybe that's an opportunity for you to create that synergy and that joint culture within both departments. But I think when you start scaling up, there are needs for each department, different needs. And yeah, in my experience, I've not found a tool that is perfect for both. We use two different tools at Headley, but they talk to each other, and we have a hierarchy between the two tools so that there's no duplication of effort, but we also are very aligned between our sales and marketing departments. They both feed into the same team.
Yeah, makes sense. I'd love to just pick up on when you were talking about, the different types of campaigns that you could use to address different types of leakage, like the not right now. So the campaigns that you could put in place and different solutions from a marketing perspective that could pick that up again and try and keep things going. When the marketing teams are working through creating content like email flows, case studies content, and they're maybe running a campaign for the not right now people who had this reason. Let's have some kind of campaign to go for them. We're often talking about messaging, positioning, tone of voice, speaking the language of the customers themselves, meet them where they're at and that kind of thing. And there's no better way to understand the customers themselves and how they speak than those who are on the phones with them, having the meetings with them and hearing their words. So you can sit in on calls, you can listen back to call recordings, you can use software like Gong, etc., to try and gather that data and gather that word in and try and improve the marketing. What are your views on that in terms of the tools that teams often talk about, like Gong, versus sitting in on calls and maybe slapping AI into this and just using AI to review call transcripts to try and come up with the words that they use and how to construct these campaigns? Do you have any views on that in terms of those methods, techniques, tools, what works?
I think that these tools and the introduction of these tools has never been easier for marketing to gain access to this kind of intelligence, right? Before, we had to plead with sales to let us shadow or let us watch the recordings or whatever it might be. Whereas with these AI transcribers or AI assistants and Gong and auto recordings and everything else, it's never been easier for marketing to have access to information. A word of caution for marketers is the sentiment piece. So a lot of the time, these AI tools analyze the sentiment in a conversation, and some are better than others. Is kind of where I'll leave it on that. Some are better than others in my experience, and so be cautious around that side of things. But for the use of words and the specifics, I think it presents us with even more opportunity to speak the same language as the prospect. There is still opportunity for marketing to actually speak with prospects, because you can unpack so much more in a conversation, especially if it's a kind of a peer-based conversation. Then, salesperson is in that conversation for one reason and a marketer might be in that conversation for another reason. I still think also that the use of a post lost survey is so valuable. So within that cadence and that re-nurture, maybe a part of that leakage, maybe one that is the ghosters, for example, you don't know anything about them. So therefore you're struggling even more so to meet them where they are, where they're at, and speak the same language as them. If you're able to introduce like a survey that's maybe incentivized by a coffee or whatever it might be to gather that intelligence, then that's an opportunity as well. It's the more intelligence that you can build, the better. I've seen some really cool things with LLMs when it comes to like internal LLMs for using the material like Gong recordings or Teams or Zoom recordings or whatever it might be, emails, AI transcripts, centralizing that all within an LLM. I've seen it used with the primary purpose of sales coaching. So helping train SDRs and BDRs and AEs and stuff based on, you do the recording, you have the call, and then you go into the platform and it will give you tips and guidance based on your company guidelines, your company voice, all of those things, which I think is awesome. But there's also a marketing angle here, I think, because if it enables the salesperson to ask for feedback and to, essentially be coached by the LLM, leaning all on your company guidelines and language and stuff, then I think also if marketing can gain access to that, then it can be, what is the current breakdown from the last 30 sales calls that have been recorded, break down the reasons as to why we didn't move forward. When it becomes much more conversational to unpack that data rather than just purely taking the metrics, the transcripts and everything else and accumulating it yourself and making those assumptions. There's a lot of tools out there at the moment, and I think marketers, it's worth speaking with your VP of sales or your sales director and say, is there a centralized library of all of this material, and has it got an LLM on it? Is it coaching the sales team? In which case, can I have a seat as well within that platform as a marketer so that I can do some analysis on it too? I think that takes the friction away as well, because as a salesperson, I would be anxious if marketing were asking if they could review my transcripts and my calls, because it's like revealing my trade secrets, right? And
Yeah.
it's, well, I wasn't successful in these conversations, so I don't really want your feedback. Thank you. Um, so I think maybe approaching it through the tech is a really good option.
And just on that, on the tech, because you just shared such a great example of where LLMs and AI can help with this. I know that you completed an AI program at Oxford, say Business School, didn't you? We've spoken about that. Just building on that, maybe you've already answered that with what you just said, but I just wondered what what has really blown you away in terms of examples of AI to solve these problems. Perhaps you've just shared it by what you just said then, but is there anything else, that you've seen from an AI perspective that has just been, wow, that's so innovative, that's so cool?
There's so much, like, it's quite scary, but I think a lot of it is quite unattainable for just anybody, because a lot of the stuff I've seen has been really impressive, but it's like, "Oh, okay, you are one of the top 5 tech companies, and you've got an entire AI innovation team and department and tech team and everything else. I'm one of 5 marketers in our marketing department, and the reality is that I'm not gonna be able to do that." So for me, the things that get me excited when it comes to AI are the small practical things that you can do, like the coaching example I just gave. Um, One of my favorites at the moment, use cases for marketers, well, for anyone really, but for marketers in particular, is using it as a translation tool. Now, I don't mean other actual languages, I mean stakeholder translation. So you're a marketing manager and you are going to go into a meeting with the sales team to try and get some feedback from them about the leads from a campaign that you recently ran, or to get their buy-in to support on a campaign, to nurture them in a way that is slightly different to the traditional sales approach, right? We know B2B buyers are changing, things are taking longer, they need to be softer, the salespeople need to be softer with the leads, they need to support them and um, provide them with more information rather than just defaulting to appointment setting. Do you want a demo? Um, you're going into that meeting. Now, how do I, as a marketer, communicate effectively in a language that the salespeople will understand and get buy in from? Take your deck that you're about to present to the sales team, build a persona in your LLM. You can do it in ChatGPT, you can do it in Claude, you can do it in a bespoke LLM, whatever it might be. Obviously, remove any sensitive information. I think we've all got to that point with the AI tools. We're like, before I share any of this sensitive
Yeah.
take that away from the open source data platforms, but build a slight persona. So tell your LLM, pretend you are an SDR, BDR, and the VP of sales inside of a tech company, blah, 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 blah. Review this deck and provide me with feedback. Don't ask it to rewrite for you, because we don't need it to write the content for us, right? We're good content marketers. We can do it ourselves. We can use it as a inspiration, but it doesn't need, or a first draft, it doesn't need to write everything for us. And instead ask it to critique, ask it for feedback from the perspective of a salesperson, ask it to score your report based on how it will be received and perceived. Tell it what you're trying to achieve from this meeting. I want to get buy-in. The B2B buyers are changing. I don't want to tell the salespeople how to do their jobs. I'm trying to find this middle ground, everything else, and ask it to critique and feedback. You can do that if you are going into a meeting with the sales team. You can do that if you are going into a meeting with the finance director. You can do it, doesn't matter which stakeholder it is inside of your business. It could be your CMO, your marketing manager, whatever. Role play it with the beast before you meet the beast in real life. And that is, I think, one of the coolest ways to use AI at the moment to coach and train and help humanize the people that, because it's hard in marketing, right? We're having to prove ourselves constantly. And if we can translate what we know in marketing into something that is helpful for others and what they care about, I think we're winning.
I think that's an excellent example. So good, to help just provide that view of what the stakeholder would care about, and the stakeholder, intentions and priorities, and all of that is so good. It goes across so many aspects of people's jobs, actually, doesn't it? This I'm about to make this presentation. Here's the key stakeholder. This is the kind of role they have. It will be able to point out the key things they would care about more than anything else. So I really love that. That's great. I've got a couple of questions I just wanted to ask you. One is, you spoke about this earlier, so I like it when we discuss this 95-5 rule, 95% of potential buyers being in the market and the 5% actively buy it. I've heard you talk about that, and I really like that, because I really think it's so important to think about that and where like time and effort is being focused, like so much time on the 5% actively buying, but the 95% that are actually just in the market at the moment should have a focus, obviously. What content do you see working really well for that 95% versus the 5%? Some of the differentiating types of content that is more that 95% play?
Well, I think the the move to AI search has kind of thrown this slightly. The move that content is so readily available and it's so digestible in whatever format you want it to be, right? And providing the content is ungated somewhere, then the LLM will pick it up and it will answer it in the way that the person wants to consume it. So I think the traditional awareness, evaluation, consideration, that traditional methodology or framework has kind of gone a bit like this. It's gone a little bit wobbly. That being said, I still think the principles stand the same. So the 5% are going to be further down that decision journey, right? So we know what works for them. We know kind of where they're at and what they're looking at. For the 95%, you've got a lot of opportunity there. So you've got the awareness pieces. So people that don't even know necessarily that they have a problem, those pieces of content, be that in ebook format, more and more content is becoming valuable in this format, podcast format, webinar, on-demand material, audio files, all of those easy to digest pieces of content. Providing it's hosted on your website alongside a transcript, it's going to also be picked up by the LLM. So it's dual purpose, but those awareness pieces. So I don't even know I've got a problem yet, but maybe other people in my position in my industry might have a problem, and now I'm going to uncover it too. The consideration pieces of content, so the more checklist and evaluation. We also know that LLMs absolutely love a checklist. So if you're comfortable in doing so, benchmarking your business against others in your space on your website ungated is going to help feed the LLM beast as well. But also, just as consumers in the B2B space, we love a checklist as well, because if you can visually show me, here's where I stand out and here's where others trip and fall, that kind of content is really digestible regardless of what stage you're at. And then the social proof, I think, is really important and something that we need to remember as marketers. What I mean by the social proof is the co-branded content. So be that a case study, that could be a podcast format with two complementary brands, that could be an on-demand webinar, it could be a guest blog, could be an ebook sharing similar pain points and challenges. There's so many different ways that you can do that social proof. But I do think more than ever, we have a trust issue in B2B. And I think AI has sped that up, and, there's a real trust issue. So the more that you can lean on partnership and referral and social proof through working alongside other brands in your space that are also trusted, I think the better.
It's huge, isn't it? Completely agree with you. It's really interesting what you were saying about Gen AI and Gen AI search as well, and turning up in that. I actually spent all yesterday in a podcast studio recording our next series on the podcast, which is about getting cited and found by AI. It's been it for me when I jump into these series is I spend so much time conducting research myself to make sure that I'm really sharp with what I'm saying. And it's been fascinating, like just researching for that. So yeah, I really, really resonate with what you said. The final question, so if there's a B2B leader who is listening along and enjoying this conversation and finding that the relationship that they have, like them and their marketing team have with the sales team, seems a little bit disjointed, a little bit broken, maybe. What is one thing that you think a marketing leader could do to try and help address a slightly broken relationship with the sales function, the sales team?
Just one thing. The first thing would be communicate. You will not believe how many businesses, how many companies, their marketing and sales team do not talk outside of the SKO. Or the last time they talked, it's summer months, we're in July, right? And the amount of businesses that will not have had their sales and their marketing team, or the senior people and the middle managers inside of their sales and marketing team, sit down in a room together and check in on everything. They will not have done it since the SKO at the top of the year. Like, it's been 6, 7 months since that conversation, and 6, 7 months in an industry that is changing. I don't wanna say all the cliche stuff, Amy, but it is changing so quickly. The landscape is changing so quickly, the B2B buyer is changing and evolving, how we have to go to market is changing, how people are buying is changing, how they're researching, everything is changing. So if you're still doing the same thing, and it may be that it's appropriate to still be doing the same thing, but if you haven't checked in on that, that's going to start building friction. So the first step when it comes to alignment, if you are a B2B leader and you are currently thinking, oh, there's a bit of tension between these two departments, don't just speak with the VP of sales either. That's a common mistake, just the top people speaking. Bring your teams together. It can be a 20-minute huddle. It can be a half-day meeting, like whatever you need to just start breaking the ice. And both come with an agenda. Don't just stand and present to one another. This is where we're at, and this is what we're seeing, and this is da, da, da. Instead, make it collaborative and communicative, because the sooner you can build a relationship between the two departments, the easier it becomes to get that information out of each department, start to optimize things, start to change things, and start to repair that relationship.
And because you've said the importance of collaboration, communication, etc., you mentioned about getting in a room together. I guess my question there around more remote teams and the fact that sometimes this can be a bit challenging if everybody's dispersed and in a more remote setting. But is your feeling there that this is worth the investment of in-person get together? Like, remote working is good, but at the same time, do you think this is a case for you probably do just need to invest in getting the teams together in person?
I think culture is shifted and friction is repaired so much easier face to face. It's so much harder to deal with and manage that when you're remote. Not everyone can travel though, right? And not every company has the facility to be able to pull everybody together more than once a year. In which case, make it micro conversations. So have a regular cadence. One of the other things that one of my clients has done that I think it speaks quite nicely to both departments is they've made it a bit of a competition. So there's been rewards in there as well. So rather than it just being like, we only want to talk about what isn't working, and salespeople, we want to know why it's not working, because you're asking a salesperson to show their vulnerability in the weakest part of their position, right? They don't want to do that to their boss, and they certainly don't want to do that to you. So it rather than it being an emphasis on negativity, start celebrating the wins as well, and make it a bit of a competition. So like, this SDR, the first person to get to 10 pieces of feedback on their leads gets X, or whatever it might be, just making it more of a conversation. And I think also one of the problems is this does often come from the leadership. So I've been in so many Zoom and Teams meetings where the VP of sales is like, right, so what's going on with this? And then the head of marketing is, da, 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 and the rest of the team are just sort of sat there. And I think that again, it's not, everyone just feels like there's a target on their back. And, now I'm answering to marketing as well. Take a smaller approach. So maybe you can buddy up with one SDR, run a campaign and get them to work really closely with you. Get approval from, the senior person in sales and from their manager. Work with one, make that your pilot, build a rapport and a relationship there, have a feedback loop, show them how you can help, show them how you can add, sales enablement content, or, this piece of content was created for this purpose and blah, blah, blah. Use them as a case study. And then when the others start seeing that person starts getting conversions and more success and stuff, they're going to want a bit of that as well. It's sometimes easier to do it on a smaller scale and then build it out, rather than I'm going to speak to these 300 SDRs and get them all to buy into marketing, because you won't earn the respect in the room either. So it's a juggling act, but start small.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. Like with most things, start small, start with pilots, but also totally agree with you on the alignment of leadership and looking at how they engage with each other in front of everybody and the culture that they're setting as well. That's an absolutely fantastic answer that I loved. And I think people will get a lot of value from that. And I'm sure there aren't loads of broken sales and marketing teams everywhere, and most people are working very nicely together, but it can sometimes be, be a bit of a challenge. So it's really good to have chatted that through. Well, Freya, thank you so much. It's been a fantastic conversation. It's been so nice to dig into this with you because, as I said, kind of a lot of this has come up throughout the content strategy series that we have put out, and it's so nice to just have this conversation with you and get a lot more detail from somebody who's there in the front line working on this every day. So thank you. Where would you like people to go? I mean, obviously we'll put the link to your LinkedIn so people can see and connect with you if that's what you would like, but is there any other action you would like anyone to take off the back of this conversation apart from that?
Thank you, Amy. I really appreciate the opportunity to come onto your podcast and talk this through. It's been a really enjoyable conversation, and as you know, one of my favorite topics to talk about. That we've been to a few events together where I've talked about this topic as well, and there's always somebody in the audience that's experiencing it. Where would I like people to find me? Yeah, find me on LinkedIn, like you said. So it's Freya Ward, and you'll link it in the podcast. We've also recently launched our own podcast, which is B2B Marketers Off the Record, which is by B2B marketers for B2B marketers. So you can find that on wherever you find your normal podcasts. Or check out the Headley Media website and click on the microphone button at the top, and it will take you through to all of the episodes. But yeah, thank you so much for having me. This has been such an enjoyable conversation.
Yeah, well, thank you. And we'll put a link to everything that you just mentioned. The podcast sounds absolutely perfect by B2B marketers for B2B marketers. So we'll put the links to everything. So yeah, all that's left to say thank you so much, Freya, for being on the show. It's been fantastic.
Thanks, Amy.